All right, feels like take 10 on this whiteboard video. Anyways, my name is Jesse, and today we're going to be doing just a quick little whiteboard video. Hopefully it's not too long. The other day I was working on the sub panel back there, and while I had it open and I was working on it, I was kind of doing like a hands-on demonstration of if I were to be installing my solar system again, and I was using that sub panel as like my critical loads panel. I was kind of explaining how the wires would connect to the inverter, what wires would be connecting to the main panel, which wires would be connecting to the critical loads panel. And I was doing more of a hands-on demonstration, but this video is going to be the exact same version, but just a whiteboard version, just to kind of help explain it in another way. And so real quick, I'm just going to go over some kind of key landmarks and vocabulary in the 12,000 XP, the critical loads panel, and the main service panel. I'm just going to be referring to the inverter as a 12,000 XP because that's what I have, but usually in most inverters, when you open them, they're going to have a lot of the same kind of layout and features in them. In the 12,000 XP, the main ones that we're going to be working with when you're kind of integrating it and hooking it up to your house is going to be the 100 amp breaker. This supplies 240 volts as your output, and it's going to feed these two lugs here on this critical loads panel. And then you'll have a neutral and you'll have a ground. And if you're just doing an off-grid setup and you're not wanting to do any type of grid backup, then that's it, you're done. It's 4 wires. The 2 hots that come out of this 100 amp breaker, they hit this L1 and L2 of this critical loads panel. And then you have the neutral that connects here to this neutral, the ground that connects to this ground, and that's it, you're finished. But if you are doing a grid bypass, then there's a couple more wires. So we'll move on to the critical loads panel. This is just a sub panel. They term it critical loads because a lot of people move critical circuits into their kind of sub panel that their inverter powers. But usually sub panels are going to be almost identical to the main service panel. They're just smaller. And the one I got, it had this kind of layout, and depending on the brand, the make, model, they're all going to be a little different, but you should see similar kind of landmarks. You'll have leg 1, and you'll have leg 2, and then at the top of those legs you'll see a lug and another lug, and that's where you'll drop your wire inside those lugs. And each leg supplies 120 volts across, and when you connect a single pole breaker to one of these legs here, you're just getting 120 volts. But as soon as you put a double pole breaker, you tap into both of those legs, and that's how you get the 240 volts. So we'll have a neutral. So this is our leg 1, leg 2. Those are the lugs for the legs 1 and leg 2. In the middle of my sub panel, there was another lug here, and that was for the neutral. But the neutral also was kind of linked to another terminal kind of bus bar on the side. And then on the side here there was a hole, but there was no terminal or bus bar. Inside the sub panel when I got it, there was a couple bags, and in one of those bags there was a ground bar, a ground terminal bus bar with a screw in there. And so I had to take the screw in that ground bar and screw it into the sub panel. Some people use these as like their main service panel, and so in a main service panel, your neutrals and grounds are kind of bonded together. So in this 100 amp service panel, there was also another screw in there, and that screw bonded the neutrals and the grounds together. And I think they all come unscrewed. So the neutrals and the grounds are separated. However, if you're using the critical loads panel as like a main service panel, then that's what that screw is there. That screw bonds the neutrals and the grounds together. Anyways, I don't know why I went off on the screw for use as a main service panel. Moving on to the main service panel. Again, they're just going to be a bigger version of the sub panel. And my main service panel kind of has a different layout, but the neutrals are running on one side of the sub panel, and then the grounds are running on the other side of the sub panel, but they're linked on the bottom. So it doesn't really matter if you want to land a neutral on this side or if you want to land a ground on this side, you can, because they're bonded together in this panel, and that's acceptable in the main service panel. If you have a sub panel you can't land neutrals and grounds on the same terminal. You have to separate them. But in the main service panel, that's acceptable. You can land neutrals and grounds because that's where the neutral bond connection is. We'll move on to kind of the connections. So hopefully I can draw this as neat as possible, because I've tried to do this before and it ends up being real messy. All right, so the first thing, we got 4 wires we're gonna run. I briefly mentioned it before. When we hook up the 12,000 XP to our critical loads panel, we're gonna run 4 wires. It's gonna be 2 hot wires, a neutral, and a ground. So our 2 hot wires are gonna come over here, and I'm gonna use black and red as kind of our wires. So we're gonna have wires coming out of this panel here. And it'll land right there on top of that lug. And then we'll have another wire and this one is going to come and land right there. So we're going to get 240 volts out of those wires, and 120 volts is going to land on each lug. And so next we're going to run the neutral and the ground. So our neutral is going to run through here, and it'll attach to this neutral terminal here. And so next one we'll do is the ground, and that's going to be the same thing. So if you're just doing off-grid, that's it. You got 4 wires that you're going to hook up to your critical loads panel, and you're done. If you're doing the grid bypass, then you need 4 more wires. And so the main benefit of doing the grid bypass is, and I'll just use my in my kind of settings and my inverter as the example. If there's no sun outside, the batteries get below 20%. Those are the settings that I set. The inverter will stop trying to use solar, and you'll just start buying electricity from the main service panel. So that way your lights don't turn off, everything just keeps running as normal. And then once your batteries top off, there's more sun outside, you'll kind of go back to going to using solar. And the inverter has settings, and so mine has settings where if the batteries get below 20% and my critical loads panel is still requiring a lot of kind of demand of energy, because I have the pool pump running, the water heater's going, the dryer's going, I got a bunch of stuff going, and I'm still needing a lot of energy, but the batteries are low, it's dark outside, it's cloudy, it's rainy, then the inverter will just realize, like, we have to bypass the solar because there is no solar, we don't have batteries. We're going to start buying electricity from the grid, and that's where this comes in handy. And so if you want that feature, it's 4 more wires that we got to move from the 12,000 XP to the main service panel. And so the 12,000 XP has a 100 amp bypass feature. So you will need a 100 amp breaker, and you're going to pop that 100 amp breaker inside this electrical panel. So this will be a 100 amp breaker, and this is where you're going to pull electricity. This is where you're going to buy electricity in the event that the inverter recognizes there's no batteries, there's no solar outside, but you're still using a lot of electricity from your critical loads. You'll just stop using solar batteries and just start buying from this 100 amp breaker. And so we're going to use 4 more wires. And our first set of wires, again, we'll run is the hot wires. We'll bring them down here. And these are going to come all the way over here and hook up to that breaker. And we'll have one more over here. All right, and now we got neutrals and ground. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to run another wire, a neutral wire. And that one's going to come right here, and it'll land right there on that terminal. And then our ground will be the same thing. So those are the 4 wires that you're going to run. If you want the grid bypass feature, you're going to run 2 wires from the grid input section inside the 12,000 XP. Those 2 wires are going to land on a 100 amp breaker. And then you'll run a neutral wire to the neutral terminal, and then you'll run a ground wire to the ground terminal. And lastly, you're going to need 2 more wires. And these 2 wires link these neutrals and the grounds to this neutral and this ground. And so you'll run another wire from this main service panel, and it'll come over here and it'll land right there. And then you'll run a ground wire from here and so those 2 sets of wires that you are running from the main service panel to the critical loads panel, it bonds these 2 neutrals and these 2 grounds. So you're essentially extending the neutrals and the grounds that are in this main service panel to the neutrals and the grounds that are in this main service panel. So when it comes time for you to start moving your circuits over that you want your solar to be powering, when you start moving like your hot water heater, your dryer, your pool pump, your air conditioner, when you start moving all these circuits, you start pulling them over here and you start moving in here, you don't have to carry over the neutrals and the grounds. The only thing you're going to carry over is the hot wire. You're not going to run over a bunch of neutrals and grounds. You're going to carry over 1 wire if it's a single pole breaker, and you're going to carry over 2 wires if it's a double pole breaker. If you want to see how, like a video of how it's done, I kind of showed how I did it in my service panel, but that's the purpose of running those 2 wires from the main service panel, the neutrals and grounds, and linking them here, is so when you start moving over circuits, you don't got to move over a bunch of neutrals and grounds. You're literally only moving over the hot wire, and that's it. That's going to be everything that you're going to need in order to make the grid bypass work. I will say the only thing that I would add on mine that I wish I would have done is I wish I would have put a manual transfer switch. So the main benefit of doing the manual transfer switch is if something happens to the inverter or something happens in my system, specifically with the inverter, it starts to fail or it breaks, or then all the hot wires that I moved from the critical loads panel to the main service panel, if I want to take this inverter off and work on it or send it back or buy another one, I don't have any power. There's no lights because all the hot wires, I extended them over to this sub panel. And so if you have a manual transfer switch, it's literally a switch that you move up or down, and it's going to transfer power to your critical loads, either supplying it from the main service panel or from the inverter. But if you don't have a manual transfer switch like me, it's not the end of the world. I just have to go back and reconnect all the hot wires that I moved over here. I just have to reconnect them over here. If you only have like 3 or 4 circuits, it's not a big deal. You could probably do it in like 10 minutes. But if you got like 20 circuits or more that you moved over to your critical loads, then you could be there for like an hour or longer. You could be there for like 2 hours, taking off all the hots and moving them back here. If you only have 3 or 4 circuits, it's not a big deal. It would take you 5 or 10 minutes. But if you got 20 circuits that you're moving over, it could take you a couple hours. But that's the benefit of the manual transfer switch, is if something happens to the inverter, you just hit the switch and then the inverter is no longer powering the critical loads. It's now the main service panel. And so that's the benefit of the manual transfer switch, that I kind of wish I had incorporated that. And I would definitely recommend it if you're going to be moving over a lot of circuits to your critical loads panel. If you're only moving over a handful of circuits, I wouldn't sweat it. A manual transfer switch, or at least the 100 amp manual transfer switch that I was looking at, was like $100, and you'd probably need some wire, some conduit. It would probably add another $200 or $300 to the cost of your system, plus some labor. But If you got 20 circuits that you're moving over into your critical loads, I would. It's a good investment. The $200 or $300 is a good insurance. If you're moving over 3 or 4 circuits, I wouldn't even worry about it. I would just, if something happens to the inverter, you just take those 3 or 4 circuits and move them back here. It would take you 10 minutes. All right. I tried not to make it too messy, but of course it looks super messy now. We'll wrap this one up. Hopefully this kind of reinforces the hands-on kind of demonstration. Let me know if you guys prefer the whiteboard stuff or the hands-on stuff. Sometimes I don't get to do a bunch of hands-on stuff, so like I gotta substitute and just use the whiteboard stuff. So, but every chance I get, I try to do hands-on stuff. All right, I will catch you guys on the next one.